Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Andrew Erickson and by Pat Fitzmaurice. And today, fellas, we are talking league winners. There is just one more weekend before the NFL season is here. So one more draft weekend. Typically, the biggest draft weekend of the year is that Labor Day weekend. So we're going to be coming at you all week with some last minute pieces of advice and guys that we think you should, go out and get and try and win your league. We're not playing for fourth place, but we're playing to win these leagues. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to give some tips on finding league winners and then some actual players, under different categories like breakouts, sleepers, maybe some deep league guys that we think could fall under this category. That's how we're going to be approaching today's show. Fitz, how many drafts do you have left with just one weekend remaining?
Oh, like maybe 4. And I'm currently in about 4 slow drafts. One of those things where I always wake up disoriented, wondering if I'm on the clock in any league, if I got the guy set to be auto-picked overnight. It's disorienting, but in a very good way. I love this time of year, man.
Erickson, what about you?
I think around the same, maybe 4 or 5 drafts. I got a doubleheader tonight, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be hanging out with my wife. I'm going to be drafting doubleheaders and drafts. So, shout out to Taylor, but yeah, not tonight.
Yeah, my weekend was very heavy on drafts. On Sunday, I had a draft at 10 a.m., a draft at 3:30, a draft at 6, and I had a second draft I was helping a friend out with throughout that second half of the day, too. So that was like a very busy day, but it's fun, right? I mean, it's why we do this, is because we love drafting, and it's a super fun time. I've also got about 4-ish left here coming up ahead of the last weekend. All right, let's dive in. Quick reminder for everyone, all of our 2024 consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. And also, the winner of Trophy Smack's custom extra large champion turnover chain is KD Films 99. Please get in touch with our customer support agents at mailbag@fantasypros.com with your mailing address and proof of your subscription to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. We will get that shipped out to you. Again, the winner is KD Films 99. Congratulations. And our next giveaway is the best way to immortalize extreme failure, the teeny tiny loser belt, courtesy of our good friends at Trophy Smack, the #1 destination for epic fantasy football trophies. This chromed out mini belt screams loser in every way. It literally has loser written all over it. Make sure your league's last place finisher gets this constant reminder of how pitiful their season was. To enter, all you need to do is subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Drop a comment below on any of our videos, and that's it. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can know when new videos are up and to claim your prize. Fitz, have you ever been the ultimate loser in one of your leagues?
Oh, I'm sure I have. I think I avoided that indignity last year, though.
I feel like it doesn't happen often. Like I do quite often miss the playoffs, right? I mean, you play in a lot of leagues, it's bound to happen, but I'm usually at least somewhere above 12th. Maybe it's 10th or 11th, but I can usually avoid getting that teeny tiny loser belt, thankfully. Let's jump into some tips to help you not get stuck with the teeny tiny loser belt and to actually go ahead and win your league. We're going to start off with a tip from each of you about kind of the best way and kind of general practice to identify these types of players, and then we'll get into some specific names as well. So Fitz, what is your #1 league winning tip?
It is to draft running backs from ambiguous backfields. And so with those ambiguous backfields where you don't know quite how the division of labor is going to work out, you get the ambiguity baked into the price. So you're usually getting these guys as mid-round picks. You're paying for a committee back who might at least be flex worthy. And if you get the committee back, well, you didn't pay a lot for it, a mid-round pick. But if the tide turns in your guy's favor, all of a sudden you have an every week starter at a fantastic price and you're turning a big profit, or maybe both guys in an ambiguous backfield pan out, as we saw with the Dolphins last year with Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane. So if the tide turns against the player you got in the ambiguous backfield, not a big deal. You burned a mid-round pick. It's not going to torpedo your season, but I think the potential reward far outweighs the potential downside. And, this year, perfect examples, the Cincinnati backfield, the Tennessee backfield. We're looking at near 50-50 splits in both in all likelihood. But if we don't get that and you happen to be on the right side of that backfield, you have the guy who ends up being the predominant guy, big profit potential.
I also think that in those types of backfields, like not that we would ever root for an injury, but you benefit more if there's an injury to the other guy because like if you have like a true handcuff situation, then you know you're at least taking a step back in talent in all likelihood. Like if you have Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson goes down, sure, you have a very good option at a good value, but he's not the same level as Bijan. Theoretically, if it's an ambiguous backfield, it's because the two guys are roughly even. So if all that's changing is a guy goes down and all the volume is now going one way, you would think that that player is kind of a higher level of talent. So it's even more kind of appealing to me than like a true handcuff situation is just those more ambiguous backfields. Because if you get lucky in one direction, it's really beneficial. Again, would never root for injuries, but it can play out that way. Erickson, what do you think about this approach of drafting running backs in ambiguous backfields?
I think it makes a lot of sense. The running back position is one of the positions that gets injured the most. So like you said, you can benefit from an injury, specifically when a subpar player is now getting a larger workload, which is going to help boost the overall production because they don't necessarily have the talent to kind of get by on a lackluster workload. So yeah, I think that this is a staple strategy when it comes to your fantasy football leagues and your drafting. You want to target these ambiguous backfields. I think that it makes a ton of sense. And I think, too, to be sometimes open, again, you may have a preference to a certain running back in a certain backfield, but if everybody in your draft feels the same way and everybody's out on one guy versus the other, I had to learn this the hard way last year. I was talking about the Miami Dolphins backfield, right? And the guy I was picking every single time, again, in addition to Achane, was Jeff Wilson. And that was wrong. I prefer Jeff Wilson over Raheem Mostert. In some universe, it is Jeff Wilson that scored 30 touchdowns or whatever Raheem Mostert did last year. So be open to, especially in drafts where everyone is Team Chase Brown. Well, I'm not a huge Zach Moss fan, but if he falls far enough, well, injuries happen. Weird stuff happens. What if Zach Moss is this week one starter? We don't know. So that's all the extra layer I would lay in with the ambiguous backfield strategy.
Erickson, let's stick with you for your league winning tip.
Draft players on good offenses. That is my my fantasy football strategy tip to find league winners, because when you look back at a lot of these league winners, especially last year, Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, well, they benefited a lot from playing on a high-powered Rams offense. It makes it much easier for a player to beat their ADP when their offense environment is creating situations for them to score fantasy points. So for me, it's kind of when I pull back the layer on this strategy at looking at both positions, or running back and receiver, where we're really trying to target these breakouts. Well, running backs that fall into the end zone a ton, again, going back to the Dolphins, that's why one of these Dolphins running backs was always going to hit last year, because if this offense is going to be high scoring, which we all thought it was going to be, I guess we couldn't pinpoint exactly which running back it was going to be. It ended up being Raheem Mostert and Achane that ended up seeing goal line roles, specifically more with Mostert, and he smashed because he ended up scoring a ton of touchdowns. So I think that's something to keep in mind. If you can find a running back that maybe is under the radar as their red zone running back in an offense that either you think is already good or is going to take a step forward compared to last year, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then at the receiver position, this is something that I have taken a long time to learn about, but just looking back at successful receivers beating their ADP, it's looking at those number 2 receivers on these high-powered offenses, because you're getting a discount on them because they're not the quote-unquote number 1 wide receiver on their team. But what are we seeing every single year? When you're in a high-powered offense, it doesn't matter. And you're going to see a lot of league winners come from, again, going back to the good offenses, the high-powered offenses, you're seeing more league winners that are number 2 receivers on their team. Puka Nacua was a number 2 receiver on his team with alongside Cooper Kupp. So I think when you're looking for league winners, you're really looking more at the offensive situation, and can this offense actually create someone that's going to score an insane amount of points? The example I kind of use is I would rather gravitate towards pass catchers and high-powered offense with more target ambiguity versus the guy, and again, I kind of use Deontay Johnson as the example. Deontay Johnson's not a league winner to me. He's a great value, but I just really find it hard to think that he can be a league winner based on the offensive infrastructure of this Carolina Panthers offense. But when I look at some of these number 2 receivers, well, like T. Higgins could be a league winner because he plays on an offense that could throw for 50 touchdowns. And if he scores 16 touchdowns as Joe Burrow's guy, okay, same thing why I like Jalen Waddle a ton. He's a number 2 receiver on his team, but this offense could throw for 5,000 yards or 40 passing touchdowns. So that's kind of where I'm looking at and kind of parsing between, hey, I want to take the value with a guy that's number 1 on their team, but it's not a great offense, versus I just want all pieces of this offense because you're already getting a baked-in discount because they're not the quote-unquote number 1 receiver on their roster.
Fitz, what are some good offenses that you're looking to draft players from this year?
I know Erickson and I are both really high on Jalen Waddle. They do have target ambiguity there to some extent, at least for Waddle, because we know Tyreek is going to command a lot of targets. They have ambiguity in their backfield, again, with Achane and Mostert and possibly Jeff Wilson and Jalen Wright. So that's one for sure. The Chiefs, like I want to walk out of every draft with a Chiefs receiver, even if it's Hollywood Brown, who's all of a sudden going at a nice discount since he's dealing with the shoulder injury. So those are a couple of them. And I love the point Erickson makes about the Rams last year with Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua being two of the late round, if not completely undrafted gems of last year. And yeah, they clicked in a good offense. That's why I'm paying such close attention to what happens with this Elijah Mitchell versus Jordan Mason situation in the 49ers backfield. Like, I'm in some deep leagues where we draft more than 200 guys. And, if anything were to happen to CMC, it's a terrific offense that's often pretty run heavy. And like, one of those guys could be a potential smash play if anything happened to CMC. So, unfortunately, we don't really have a clear picture of who's winning that battle right now, but it's definitely worth keeping tabs on.
Let's dive into some actual players that we want to be drafting as league winners. And I do think it's like helpful to think about league winners more so even than like sleepers. Like, for a long time, it was like, all right, who's your favorite sleeper this year? And I'm not the first to point this out. We kind of live in a post-sleeper era of fantasy football. There's so much information out there. There's so much analysis out there that most guys aren't going under the radar. To me, it's about identifying the guys who aren't under the radar, but who have that higher league winning ceiling relative to their cost that maybe isn't getting discussed about as much. So to me, there's a distinction there between kind of sleepers and league winners. And that's why I think it's really important to identify your favorite league winners every season. So this is one of my favorite episodes to do. Let's start with the league winning breakouts. And Fitz, we'll start with your number one player here.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite episodes. Not one of my favorite phrases, though. I'm not real fond of league winners, just because I think it always takes a team. I know that's cliched, but no, and we're always looking for those guys who can give you the late season turbo boost. But I totally get it, and a guy who could potentially return a massive profit in your investment and be something close to a league winner. Malik Nabers, he just has the it factor, and we knew he was a terrific prospect coming out of LSU, just one of the best route runners in the class and truly special after the catch. Nabers then went out and had just an absolutely sensational training camp, like highlights every single day. And it seems as if Brian Daboll is now sort of rightly making Nabers the centerpiece of this Giants offense. And, this might run sort of counter to the advice that Erickson just gave about trying to find players on good teams, because we don't feel totally confident in Daniel Jones, of course, who had the terrible start to last season before he tore his ACL. But I will say, though, 2 years ago, the Giants offense wasn't bad in Brian Daboll's first year with Daniel Jones. Like, they were 16th in the league in offensive touchdowns, so middle of the pack. Daniel Jones had a pretty decent season. Like, I'm not totally worried about Daniel Jones sinking Malik Nabers and keeping him from living up to his potential. Like, I think he's going to live up to his potential right away. And right now he's going as a low-end wide receiver 2 in a lot of drafts. And I've got him ranked as more of a high-end wide receiver 2.
I couldn't agree more. I've said it before. I think this is the cheapest price you will ever get Malik Nabers in a draft, assuming health, like his whole career. I just think he's that good. I don't think the gap in talent between him and Marvin Harrison Jr. is that great. And yes, there is a gap in quarterback play, but I don't think it's great enough to be reflective of the difference in kind of hype for this season specifically that the two players have respectively. I just think Nabers is that good, and he will get every target he can absolutely handle in this offense. So he is one of my favorite targets in that 4th and 5th round range. I mean, if he gets to the 5th round, like, I'm not even hesitating. I'm taking him, but I'm taking him in a lot of 4th rounds as well. Erickson, like Fitz mentioned, it does kind of run counter to your take players in good offenses, but I know that you have also talked about seeing Nabers as a value this season.
Well, I think it does depend on what you think the Giants are. If you think the Giants offense is going to be 32nd in the NFL, then yes. But the thing to point out here is when we talked about the Rams, were people high on the Rams offense last year? Not really. There was concerns. That's why those guys weren't as popular, even as late round picks, a running back and a receiver between Kyron and Puka, because we were worried the offensive line, it was all injured. Matthew Stafford, is he even going to be healthy? So, I mean, when you think about it, it kind of sounds a lot like the Giants. What happened last year? Daniel Jones got injured. And that's why everyone's writing them off. But 2022, who was number one in the NFL in adjusted completion percentage? Daniel Jones. So if this offense can be 20th, 25th, that's all we need, honestly. I think that's all we need for Malik Nabers to smash his ADP, because once the ball at Daniel Jones' hands into Malik Nabers, he's going to take over. That's all we need to do. And just based on what Brian Daboll did, again, we've seen this pairing work before. We saw Daboll and Daniel Jones get to the playoffs in the NFC East. So we've seen this offense function and work before. So this isn't, I don't think it's crazy to project the Giants being a okay offense or not bottom 5 offense. So that's kind of how I would spin it. And yes, we think we know what the good offenses are, but there are also offenses that surprise us every year. And then the offenses that usually disappoint that we think are going to be good, it's usually because of injuries.
Fitz, I want to ask one extra question on Nabers, just because of all the guys we're talking about today, he has the highest ADP by a decent amount. Is there a threshold where you think a player needs to be going after this point to sort of qualify in your mind as a league winner? Or like, because, if he starts creeping up in like the back end of the 3rd round or something like that, can he still be a league winner at that high a cost? Or do you need to be more of a mid-round pick to sort of fit that bill?
I actually think he could be, because I do think the top end of the range of outcomes is something like 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns. Like, I think he could be that good where he is a top 5 receiver this year.
All right, I think that's fair. I just wanted to check, because again, a lot of these other names are more mid-round, later-round guys. He sort of stands out in that respect. Let's go to one of those other names. Erickson, who's your first league-winning breakout?
I'm going to go with Jaxon Smith-Njigba for the Seattle Seahawks. Now, we got the description for this show. It was basically looking at who can really beat their ADP. And I think ADP matters a lot when you're talking about league winners, because you're complementing your first and your early round picks with these later round guys that beat their ADP. And that's just giving your team, again, talking about teams win fantasy football championships. Unless you had Chris McCaffrey last year or CeeDee Lamb, maybe 1 or 2 guys really move the needle, but you need these guys to produce in bunches. And to me, JSN looks like that player entering year 2 that has been kind of written off. I know we talked about him on the value show last week, and it's so funny that on Sleeper in particular, that's where he goes the latest, despite the fact that Sleeper is one of the main dynasty platforms. So it seems like the dynasty community is just very low on JSN, and that's kind of trickled into redraft. But everything about this year, him entering this season with a new offensive coordinator, with Tyler Lockett another year older, it just screams to me, is he going to be a top 10 wide receiver? I'm not sure. But is he going to beat his ADP where he's going wide receiver 40? Yeah, I think so. I feel really confident about that. Last year, he was wide receiver 48, and it was a pretty bad run out overall when you look at a player that missed most of his last year of college. He was dealing with a wrist injury to start the year, and he's thrown into an offense with 2 established receivers that already have rapport with the current quarterback under center. So it was a big uphill battle for JSN. I think we went over our skis a little bit last year, drafting him so aggressively, and now we don't want to have him anymore. So for me, I think JSN just, again, looking for a player that I can take the upside bet on and not really associate a ton of risk. So that's kind of how I view JSN after a rookie year, where you look at some of what Jacob Gibbs has posted from JSN's rookie year. I mean, he's good against man coverage. He averaged 2.43 yards per route run outside of the slot as a rookie. So we don't have just this pigeonholed slot receiver that can't do anything else but that. He was very talented, very productive at Ohio State, playing along guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Now, maybe we took that a little too far. Maybe he's not as good as those guys, but that's okay. I think that he could be better than Tyler Lockett. If he could be the 1B in this offense, we've seen that be very productive. We've seen Tyler Lockett basically go toe-to-toe with DK Metcalf and his scoring potential every single year with the Seattle Seahawks. So I think JSN is just a good bet to make where he goes as a second-year wide receiver, first-round draft pedigree. I think he's just a good bet to make.
What do you think, Fitz? Are you in on JSN, especially at his price?
Yes, and we can get head faked sometimes by great college seasons, but as Erickson was sort of indicating, that season where, while playing alongside Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave at Ohio State, JSN had 90 catches and 1,600 yards. Playing with those guys, sharing a field with those guys. And oh, by the way, he did it as an 18-year-old true sophomore. Like, I'm pretty convinced by that. And it's going to take a lot to shake my faith that he's not going to work out, or that, I have faith he will work out in the NFL. And one sort of disappointing season isn't going to shake that faith. And I think part of it was usage related because I don't think Shane Waldron really used JSN optimally last year. He had this low average depth of target, especially early on. At one point early last year, I think his average depth of target was like 3 yards. Like, come on, why are you using this guy like Jarvis Landry? Like this guy can be a downfield baller. So I'm optimistic Ryan Grubb is going to use him in a more traditional way. And I think we could very well see a second-year breakout.
I think the argument with JSN, it just doesn't feel like a stretch, right? All you have to do is, okay, he takes a little bit more of the pie from Tyler Lockett, who's getting older, has been kind of banged up throughout training camp, and every report has been, we love JSN. We want to use JSN more. When they asked JSN about how he felt about Shane Waldron when he left, he was like, okay, yeah. I wish him the best, right? He was happy to get out of Shane Waldron. And we're seeing the Waldron antics in the Bears preseason usage. They love Gerald Everett. He's got his guys that he wants to get the ball to, and JSN really wasn't in the plan, it seems like, last year. So I think that it's not even a stretch to look at him as the number 2. And again, going back to what I said earlier, Seahawks offense, if you just look at cumulative ADP, 16th. So they're right there in the middle where the market is, okay, this offense could be good if we get Geno from 2 years ago, not last year. And if JSN's the number 2 receiver, well, going back to, he's discounted because he is a number 2. There is target ambiguity. So again, making that the price with the draft pedigree, I think it, again, like I said, it's just a good bet to make.
I'm just like really excited in this offense in general, like trying to identify offenses that I think are a little undervalued and can be really good this year. Just like, I want to get a lot of DK Metcalf. I want to get a lot of Kenneth Walker. I want to get a lot of JSN. I just want to I want to get Geno Smith, depending on the league format. Like I just really like investing in Seattle this season. Fitz, who is your next league winning breakout?
It's Javonte Williams, and we know that running backs often aren't fully themselves in their first season back after a torn ACL, and that seemed to be the case with Javonte last year. Averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Didn't really show us the same sort of power and burst we saw from him as a rookie in 2021 when he was splitting work with Melvin Gordon. And we were so anxious to get a situation where he wasn't splitting work with Melvin Gordon, who everyone wanted to write off as washed. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see the better version of Javonte Williams this year now that he's almost 2 full years removed from ACL surgery. And I think the reason why Javonte could maybe be this force multiplier in fantasy football this year is the pass catching potential. Running backs in Sean Payton's offenses always are heavily involved as pass catchers. The Broncos led the league in running back targets last year, 153. There was only one other team that had more than, I think, 131. So that's like 9 running back targets a game. Now, granted, they might be chopped up among a couple different backs in this offense, but Javonte had 47 catches last year. I think there's the potential for much more. And now here comes Bo Nix, who was this screen and check down guy throughout his college career. He runs a ball control passing game, and that's exactly what Sean Payton is going to want him to do. So this is just looking like a pass catching bonanza for Denver running backs. And by the way, like Javonte was used pretty lightly early last season coming off the knee injury, which made sense. Then he had a hip issue at one point. But over a 10-game stretch from week 7 to week 16, Javonte averaged 18.9 touches a game. And there was a 30-touch game against the Chiefs in there. But even if you take that out, it's like 17 and a half touches a game. Peyton always used multiple running backs in New Orleans. And I do think Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime are going to have roles for the Broncos. But Sean Payton really gave Javonte a lot of work down the stretch last year. And that was kind of eye-opening. Maybe we see that again in 2024, but this time with a fully healthy 100% version of Javonte Williams.
I love players who are yet another year removed from their major injury. I've had Javonte kind of settled in that back half of the 20s among their RBs for most of this preseason. I think I want to get him in the top 24, like at the back end of it. But I'm really excited about what his fit could be in a Sean Payton offense, given what the talent was pre-injury. I'm really excited about Javonte this year. Erickson, where do you have Javonte ranked?
So Javonte, I keep moving up every time I look at my running back rankings because it's been a total 180 for me when it comes to Javonte preseason. Very concerned about the workload. Is he going to make the team? Now, I never thought that he was going to get cut, but He comes in, slimmed down, again, another year removed from the injury. They challenged him. I think Sean Payton was going into this offseason thinking, I don't know what I'm going to get from Javonte. And Javonte's shown, hey, this is my contract year. I need to prove that I'm an NFL starter coming off an injury. And that's another big thing. Contract years for running backs matter. A lot of these big running back seasons come in contract years where teams have every incentive in the world to ride them into the ground, especially when you look at Denver. They have Estime. He's waiting in the wings to take over the Javonte Williams role next year or potentially at the end of this season if Javonte doesn't hold up. So I think you should draft, every draft you should go into, you should leave with a Denver running back. Again, you're looking at how much equity, touches, receptions, targets, carries you're going to get from this Denver Broncos backfield. What is this offense going to do? They have Courtland Sutton, Josh Reynolds. Those are their top two receivers. You have a three-headed tight end monster. I think you're going to get carries and just so much of the pie of this offense is going to go to the running back position. So again, we're not crazy excited about the offense, but again, going back to this offense can go from being viewed as bottom five like it was last year to average. Well, you're cooking with gas. And all these Broncos running backs are so discounted. So originally I was really more into McLaughlin, and now I just want all of them. So McLaughlin, I think I've moved inside my top 36. I've moved Javonte up to RB21 in the preseason roundtable that came out, I think today. I wrote about who do I feel most comfortable drafting now before the preseason started between now and then. It was Javonte Williams. That's the guy I'm circling because this Broncos backfield is going to score like Fitz said, a bonanza of fantasy points. So very excited to draft Javonte, Jaleel, Estime, all the guys.
Yeah, I just bounced him up from RB26 to RB24, and like I might go as high as 23 or even 22. I wouldn't put him inside the top 20, but I like I said, I'm very excited about Javonte. Fitz, where do you have him ranked?
Yeah, not high enough. You guys aren't allowed to outflank me in your Javonte rankings. I think I've got him like RB24. Now I'm going to have to move him up further. So
right now we're even, but I might keep him going. But by the way, he wasn't going to be on this list, but as we were talking, the Chiefs just waived Kadarius Toney. So do we want to take 20 minutes, do an emergency pod on that, and then get back to the show? Or no?
Kadarius Toney had the longest run of value ever because of one game that he played against the Dallas Cowboys.
We had the appetizer last week. Now it's time to feast. College football is back. Don't miss any of the action. Jump in at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's a full slate of games for week 1, including the big matchup in Atlanta between preseason number 1 and number 16. It's super easy for first timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. This is going to be DraftKings' biggest college football season to date. Enjoy the ride now all the way through the expanded playoffs. Georgia is favored by 13.5 over Clemson, nearly 2 touchdowns for the number 1 team in the country. That total on that one comes in at 48.5. Miami versus Florida, another fun one. Total on that is 54. The Hurricanes are laying just 2.5 points. And for all the newbies getting into the college spirit, here's something extra special. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings all college football season long. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, Erickson, who's your next league-winning breakout?
Going with Xavier Worthy, rookie wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think the thing to point out here is draft rookies. Rookies are, I think, super connected all the time with league winners because they have a wide range of outcomes, and plenty of them do absolutely nothing and they burn you because they're bad. But the ones that hit, especially at this level, I mean, we're talking about good offenses. The number 1 offense in terms of cumulative ADP is the Kansas City Chiefs. And I can get a rookie first round pick at wide receiver that the Chiefs traded up to get with blazing speed attached to Patrick Mahomes. To me, it fits like how De'Von Achane got drafted to the Dolphins last year, where everyone knew it was the perfect fit. This is going to be so amazing. And he was undervalued because we weren't sure how the touches were going to shake out. So I'm just not going to overthink it with Worthy. I'm not going to overthink how's it going to shake out with Rice. Well, Hollywood Brown is going to be missing a couple games. What happens when he comes back? I don't care about those things. All I know is week 1, he's going to be on the field with Patrick Mahomes, with that speed, with an awesome college prospect profile, early breakout age, very productive with good competition at Texas, punt return ability. He just checks off all the boxes for me. Loved him as a prospect. And I just think he's the perfect fit for Patrick Mahomes and what this offense wants to do. And basically torch the earth after last year's lackluster passing game. I think the Chiefs are just going to roll it back and we want to three-peat, and we want to do it in the most fun way possible. And I don't see how they do it without Xavier Worthy being heavily involved.
Fitz, you said earlier that you want to come away from drafts with a Chiefs receiver. Is Worthy, near the top of that list of those guys?
Yes, he is. And Worm, before I elaborate, can you give us a ruling on whether it's Xavier or Xavier? I don't think they're two different pronunciations of it. I think it's just how people choose to pronounce it. And I want to get your take on what's correct here.
I've been saying Xavier, but I haven't looked it up or anything. I can try and pull it up right now.
Are we debating his name specifically or the name Xavier?
The name Xavier.
Xavier.
Oh, the name in general. I usually say Xavier, but
starts with an X, not a Z. Xavier.
But I feel like I hear people say Xavier more often, which is why it's kind of been ingrained in me.
We need someone watching that's name is Xavier to tell us what the right answer is.
It would be great if Xavier Worthy himself could give us clarity on this. So, but yeah, I'm very much on board, and he and Hollywood Brown are really the reasons why I'm not that into Rashee Rice. I know that everyone thinks he's maybe a draft value this year, especially with the offseason he had and concerns about potential legal difficulties. But I think the reason I'm worried about Rice isn't the legal stuff. It's that there were no receivers who could get open downfield for the Chiefs last year. Like Justin Watson was their deep threat last year. That is suboptimal. And now they've got two guys who can absolutely fly with Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. And so I just think Rice's role is going to be somewhat diminished. They just don't need to lean on him as much now that they've got these two guys. And what better person to tap into ridiculous speed at the wide receiver position than the ultimate mad scientist, Andy Reid? And, what better quarterback to leverage all that speed than Patrick Mahomes? So, yeah, I think this is going to work out pretty splendidly for both Hollywood and Xavier Worthy this year. And both of those guys are going as low-end wide receiver 3s, high-end wide receiver 4s. Great values at those prices.
I didn't have time to pull up actual Xavier Worthy, which I now just said Xavier because you guys are in my head. But I did find in the U.S., this name is typically pronounced as though it starts with a Z. It is less commonly pronounced as though it starts with the X, like X Xavier. So for whatever that's worth, I actually don't know how.
Is this different in other countries? If we were in Wales, would the Erickson pronunciation be correct?
So actually, in other parts of the world, it does mention this. The name is pronounced as though it begins with an H, almost like Javier. I know somebody who pronounces it that way, actually. So
I'm just going to go with the broadcast Thursday night when Xavier Worthy roasts Nate Wiggins for 80-yard touchdown on the first play of the game. Play action. Oh, baby, it's going to be great.
Okay, first of all, rude. I'm trying to do a good job here of pulling up this name, and instead you're just roasting me while I waste time doing this. I can't find it quickly enough. All right, we'll move on from that. Fitz, we just talked about the Chiefs as a team that we want to be really invested in. I think the Packers are another one where I want to make sure I'm coming away from drafts with a receiver, and the next player on your list is a Packers receiver.
Yeah, it's Christian Watson, and the ambiguity does kind of scare some people away from that wide receiver core. Yes, the Packers have a lot of good young pass catchers vying for targets, but in games where Watson, Jaden Reed, and Romeo Dobbs were all healthy last season, Watson had a 27% target share, Reed a 22% target share, Dobbs an 18% target share. And these are high-value targets for Watson. He is a field stretcher. Average depth of the target was 13.8 yards in 2022, 15.6 yards last year. This is a dude who's 6'4", has sub 4.4 speed, and has shown a knack for scoring touchdowns. He had 8 of them in a 4-game stretch as a rookie, 4 of them over a 3-game stretch last year. If he can stay healthy and play 16 or 17 games, I do think there's a realistic shot at double-digit touchdowns for Christian Watson. And yeah, health has been an issue. You saw a specialist about his hamstring problems in the offseason. They found this muscle imbalance in his 2 legs. He is trying to remedy the issue with an adjustment to his training regimen. So hopefully that keeps him on the field more often. I think that's really all he needs to have a very good season, or at least return some sort of a profit on his, wide receiver 40 ADP. I mean, for a guy with this sort of touchdown upside, I think that's a pretty reasonable price. And I do think he has a chance to just smash his ADP.
Watson has been the Packers receiver that I've come away from the most drafts with. He's been my favorite combination of upside and talent with the price. Erickson, who have you kind of come away with most out of this receiving room?
All of them. All of them. That's what I've been doing. Again, Fitz has been reading the preseason roundtables because I think a few weeks back that talked about my 2 rules: draft a Denver Broncos running back and draft a Green Bay Packers wide receiver. So, of course, I can't talk about either of them on this show because Fitz beat me to the punch, picking Denver running backs and Green Bay Packers wide receivers. So I think you should draft all of them. Jaden Reed is still, I get he's the most expensive guy, but he was also the best guy last year with Jordan Love. And yes, the touchdowns was a lot, but it also means he's good. And I just think that the slot 12 personnel, is he on the field in 2 receiver sets? I just think that's a little overrated. It happened with Christian Kirk, right? Christian Kirk doesn't play in 12 personnel. Did that matter? He led the Jaguars in targets last year. He was their most productive receiver when he was healthy. So I think it tends to be overblown a little bit, especially when you're looking at the preseason usage. So for me, I want all these Packers receivers because I think Jordan Love could lead the NFL in passing touchdowns. So if that happens, again, betting on a good offense that you're getting discounted pieces to, one of these Packers receivers is going to finish, again, as a wide receiver 1, I think, because I don't think you're going to get all healthy games from all 4 of those guys. So whoever ends up emerging, whoever stays healthy, and like Fitz said at the beginning, I just need bursts of production at different times during the year. So I would embrace the ambiguity of these Packers receiver room and draft them all. But Christian Watson, given where his price is, yes, I think that he is accurately priced. But Dontavian Wicks, he's the cheapest. So I also find myself drafting a lot of him too, because if Watson doesn't stay healthy, then he seems like he would be the next to take over that role. And last year he was really productive when he got to play.
And not to speak for Erickson, but I think when he says draft them all, he means a different fantasy teams, not on the same team, having all 5 Packer receivers.
Unless it's best ball. Draft them all on the same best ball team.
You can kind of draft them all in a sense by just drafting Jordan Love, and just whichever one of them is great, you're going to get some of that, the piece of that pie. Erickson, who's your next league winning breakout?
For me, it's a player that I think the entire industry was super high on last year, and he had the worst run out possible, and it's Tony Pollard. I want to say I would also thinking about putting Jaylen Warren here too, but at the time of the show sheet requirements, he was still dealing with the hamstring injury. Looks like the hamstring's okay, so I just wanted to mention that. But Tony Pollard, to me, last year was obviously disappointing. He had all the usage we could possibly ask for and what did it take? The actual production that was taken away from us. But what Tony Pollard said, he felt like he was back from that broken leg injury around week 11. And from week 11 onward, he was PFF's highest graded rusher. So he was starting to feel better. He was looking better, looking more explosive. And so far throughout the preseason, he's looked like the old Tony Pollard. He's looked explosive. He's looked decisive. He's catching passes out of the backfield from Will Levis in this new offense. So I'm looking at Tony Pollard as a post-hype sleeper. He was at his best when he was in a complementary role, splitting touches with another running back. And that's the exact same role he's finding himself here in Tennessee with an offense that I think is going to want to run the football. They have increased their offensive line personnel. They brought in Bill Callahan, the offensive line guru. So I think they're going to be able to establish the run a little bit more, help protect Will Levis, who I think is going to have a shorter average depth of target this year, traditionally what we've seen from Callahan when he was with the Cincinnati Bengals, when he was coaching Jake Browning. So I think that means a lot of opportunity and touches for Tony Pollard. So for me, I'm leaving the light on for Pollard after he disappointed big time last year because I think the talent is there. I mean, you don't put a guy in the top 5 running back discussion and then just leave him for dead unless he gets injured the next year. So for me, I think that he's going so late, and we've already seen the league winning upside he can deliver. So I'm going to go with Tony Pollard.
Yeah, I've shared enough this month about how much I love Tony Pollard at his cost. I want to be above consensus for sure on him. Fitz, what do you think about Pollard this year?
Yeah, Pollard could work out. We should probably just move on. I have a feeling the subject is going to come up again a little later.
Before we move on, anybody who knows me knows there's basically nothing in the world I love more than going to baseball games all summer long. In fact, I've already made plans to attend not 1, not 2, but all 3 Orioles games out here in Denver this weekend when they are playing the Rockies. I'm very excited to finally be going to those games. I've been talking about them for several weeks now. To make sure I got the best seats for those games at the best price, I turned to Game Time. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. I planned ahead for the O Series, of course, but one of my favorite things about Game Time are the last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute minute for not just sports, but concerts, comedy, theater, and more. If I had waited till this week to buy these Orioles tickets, I know I would have gotten some great deals on Game Time. Two other features I love for how much it takes the frustration out of ticket buying are Game Time seat views, showing your view from the seat before you buy, and all-in pricing, so I know the total upfront with no hidden fees. Game Time is simple to use, but more importantly, the app gives me all the information I need to make an easy ticket purchase. So this summer, take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code FANTASYPROS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code FANTASYPROS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, guys, let's move into the league-winning sleepers. And here is the player that Fitz was alluding to when we were talking about Tony Pollard.
Tyjae Spears, who goes from backing up Derrick Henry, the prototype for workhorse running backs, the guy who's led the NFL in rushing attempts in 4 of the last 5 years, to sharing a backfield with Tony Pollard, who is coming off a bad season. And I'm not saying Tony Pollard is bad. Very distinct possibility that he got off to the rough start in 2023 because of the broken foot he sustained in the 2022 playoffs. But still, I mean, the reality of the situation is that Tyjae Spears is a much better outlook now than he did as the number 2 running back behind Derrick Henry. And we have heard Brian Callahan talk about how he views Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears as interchangeable parts, basically, who can play on either early downs or in passing downs. And man, like, Spears was playing behind Derrick Henry last year, but he looked so good whenever he got onto the field. Just magic when he had the ball in the open field with his acceleration and ability to change direction without gearing down. So, yeah, I mean, I think that Spears has the potential to give you a big return on a middle round investment. This is exactly the sort of ambiguous backfield we should be targeting. And right now, Spears is the cheaper of the 2 parts. Pollard is going for more, and Spears is the guy who you can typically get somewhere in the middle of your draft. And I think he's a really good investment at that point.
I don't know if you've updated since the last time it was updated on our site, Fitz. It looks like you have them back to back, Pollard and Spears, RB29 and RB30. So if costs were identical, do you prefer Pollard, or would you even still take Spears if they were exact same price?
Slight preference on Spears. I want the younger guy. And I know, I'm not as big on Spears in Dynasty because he's got that weird knee issue where he doesn't have like cartilage in one of his knees. And maybe he has the Jay Ajayi career path where Ajayi had that same condition, had like one really big season, and then like 2 years later, his career was gone in a puff of smoke. But that's why I kind of like Spears more in redraft. Like, I made this comparison on another show where it's like leasing a car. Drive it hard for a year and then turn it in, and here you go, take the keys. I kind of want Spears, and hopefully this is the year he drives hard.
Erickson, you obviously like Pollard. Do you like Spears as well?
Yeah, so this is one of the backfields that I would be open to taking both guys to kind of see how things play out. I think that this one is very interesting in particular because a lot of the running back analysis comes down to workload and touches and who's playing more, but this one, it actually is more of a bet on talent, because if you're seeing them both basically switch off drives, well, whoever the better running back is going to be in situations where the offense is scoring points. So if Tony Pollard is ripping off massive runs when he's playing, well, the offense is going to score in those drives. But in the vice versa, if Tyjae Spears is playing really, really well, then he's going to be on the field when they're scoring opportunities. So I think it is an interesting dichotomy where it's really less about, because the workload is projected to be split, you actually get to pick who do you think right now in 2024 is going to be a better running back. I think it's going to be Tony Pollard. Fitz thinks it's going to be Tyjae Spears, but you could see the scenarios. And then obviously if an injury happens, well, the other guy is going to explode. So I think that you have a floor baked in with both players because they're going to get enough touches to get you by. And then you have another ceiling case with an injury to potentially either player. Again, talking about Spears with the ACL, what's his longevity? And obviously Tony Pollard was coming off a major injury in 2022. So he's been banged up before. But I think both guys are great options.
Erickson, let's stick with you for your next league winning sleeper.
Another rookie wide receiver that I absolutely am in love with, Brian Thomas Jr. He was the last guy I mentioned on my 60-second rant of players you should draft in 2024 on TikTok. Go check it out on Fantasy Pros, at the Fantasy Pros TikTok account. Brian Thomas Jr., I think he's going to take over the Calvin Ridley role in this offense. You look at Ridley and Zay Jones last year, they combined for nearly 200 targets. So when Brian Thomas first went to the Jacksonville Jaguars, was drafted, nobody looked at it as, oh, this is a great landing spot. They looked at it, oh, Christian Kirk is there, Evan Ingram is there. It's a bit crowded, but it's not crowded when it comes to the perimeter targets. I think that Brian Thomas is clearly going to be the guy that they look to on the outside with Trevor Lawrence's big arm. Last year, Lawrence, third in passing attempts of 20 plus yards, second in 20 plus air yard completions, and first in touchdowns of 20 plus air yards. That's all Brian Thomas did last year at LSU was catch bombs from Jaden Daniels. So I think it's the perfect fit for Trevor Lawrence in one of the offenses that does still want to attack downfield. I think the AFC South is the shootout division this year. Week 1, Jaguars Dolphins. Oh my God. Points galore. So I think Brian Thomas is going to pop from the get-go. He already has a full-time role. And the number one guy he's competing for targets with is Gabe Davis, the guy that still has yet to command 100 targets in a single season up to this point in his NFL career. So again, if he can't out-target Gabe Davis, then Brian Thomas was never going to hit in the first place. I think he can. I think he has insane upside, but he showed at LSU playing alongside another alpha receiver like Malik Nabers. So while Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram are eating up underneath, I think Brian Thomas is going to have so many big plays if he's in that Ridley role, which was absolutely salad. I mean, Ridley could have been a top 10 receiver last year in fantasy if he had held onto the ball. So I think if Thomas squeezes those, you get better regression for Trevor Lawrence in terms of less dropped passes, the passes that aren't being erased because of penalties. I think Brian Thomas could have a monster rookie year. And that's why I've made a lot of bets on him to lead all rookie receivers in receiving yards at 16-1 odds over on Betting Pros. So I just love Brian Thomas in this fit.
Where do you have him ranked quickly? Because I like everything you're saying and I agree with you, but I struggle to get him ranked too much higher than consensus. Where do you have him?
I think I have him right in the cusp of receiver 40. So I actually have him wide receiver 38. So I actually have him above Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think that he has a better chance of actually finishing as a wide receiver 1 than JSN does.
Where do you have him ranked, Fitz?
I think I'm in the 40s somewhere, and I probably need to move him up. I've been late to the party on Brian Thomas, not getting enough of him in drafts, and need to come away from a few of my last drafts with him. The last time I had questions about an LSU receiver who put up circus numbers in a season, and was playing with a terrific quarterback and an alpha receiver. Last time that happened at LSU, it was with Justin Jefferson. And I wasn't sure how much of it was playing with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Turned out Justin Jefferson was pretty good. Maybe that's a similar situation we're getting now, sort of deja vu with Brian Thomas, having played with Jaden Daniels and Malik Nabers. So I need to get more Brian Thomas. I think he could just kind of seize the number one receiver role this year with Jacksonville and maybe take Trevor Lawrence to new heights.
It's worth noting, like, was a very legitimate first-round receiver. He kind of got overlooked, I think, a little bit during the draft process because there were 3 like borderline historic or actually historic prospects ahead of him in Marvin Harrison, Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze. But like Brian Thomas Jr., like for most people, was the consensus number 4 prospect, like ahead of anybody outside of that big 3. So like a very legitimate, real, like talented prospect who maybe didn't get as much love as he deserved because he happened to be in the same class as those 3 other guys. So
he was on the same team as Malik Nabers, right?
On the same team
he
as
was
one
the
of them,
number 2 receiver.
Yeah.
So again, going back to getting these discounted number 2 guys on college teams, on NFL teams, if the offense is cooking, it's going to bring more than one guy along for the ride.
Yeah. It's time for this week's player that we would give almost anything to draft, brought to you by Uber Eats. That player is Chase Brown, one of Fitz's favorite league-winning sleepers. He has been talking about him for about 8 months now.
Yeah, so coming off the season where he had 58 touches, this small sample size, but man, he looked really good on some of those touches. His 4.4 speed is very legit. And his competition for touches is Zach Moss. Yes, Moss had this great 4-game run early last season when Jonathan Taylor was on IR. And in the first game, Taylor came back where they used him really lightly. That was the 3-touchdown game for Moss against the Tennessee Titans. But Moss has been in the league for 4 seasons, and he started 3 of those seasons in Buffalo, and he was out-snapped and out-touched by Devin Singletary in all 3 of those seasons. Nothing against Singletary, but if you can't, beat out Devin Singletary. Maybe you're not, really cut out to be an RB1 in the NFL. Brown is faster than Moss. He's a better pass catcher than Moss. And by the way, Moss has had trouble staying healthy throughout his NFL career. And as I've noted many times on this show before, Worm, Chase Brown did average 27.3 carries a game in his final year at the University of Illinois. So if the Bengals decided they liked Chase Brown a lot more than Zach Moss and wanted to make him a 3-down back a la Joe Mixon, Brown has shown us that he can handle that sort of workload.
Erickson, this is both a guy who is in an ambiguous backfield and a guy who is on a good offense. So kind of a no-brainer based on our league-winning tips at the top of the show.
Famously said back in May, I think that Zach Moss was the worst pick you could make in fantasy football. Now, I don't feel as strongly about it now because he's going behind Chase Brown. Just want to be clear about that. But yeah, I'm right there with Fitz. Maybe been screaming Chase Brown for 3 months, not 8 months, but once I looked at those Illinois game logs, I was convinced that this guy could be an absolute monster. So Chase Brown, yes, been on Team Chase Brown. And I think, too, when you look at just kind of trying to see what might project what would happen, because we're expecting at least a 50-50 split to start. The Bengals play the Patriots in week 1, a game that they may not be forced to really push pedal to the metal necessarily. So this could be a game script where it actually is more of Zach Moss, and you'll see the immediate conclusion be, oh, Zach Moss is the guy. He's going to take over. Let's say he scores a touchdown or two. Then you immediately buy low on Chase Brown ahead of a matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, where you're going to need that explosive juice. So even if you don't get Chase Brown in your draft, just after week 1, we may be talking about him on the trade show. Just little tease there.
So that's why the guys would give up almost anything to draft Chase Brown this season. That was this week's Uber Eats Player of the Week. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Erickson, who is your next league-winning sleeper?
I'm going with Rico Dowdle, running back for the Dallas Cowboys. And I think the analysis is pretty clear and dry. Clear cut, dry, whatever you want to say. He could be the Dallas Cowboys starting running back. And last year, again, it didn't work out for Tony Pollard, but Tony Pollard was super expensive. Rico Dowdle is free across all fantasy football ADP. Again, when we did the value show last week with Welsh, he was the player that was screaming out his value on every single home site, Yahoo, ESPN, Sleeper. It didn't matter. Rico Dowdle was severely undervalued just based on the fact that this guy could be the Dallas Cowboys starting running back. And that matters a ton. So week 1's going to be very telling. Or if they sign Dalvin Cook, I know Cook was visiting the Dallas Cowboys, so we shall see how things shake out. But again, I can't guarantee that Rico Dowdle is going to be the Dallas Cowboys running back, but just the chance, the odds that actually ends up happening is more than worth where you have to draft him. So that's why I think he could be a league winner, because you could get the Dallas Cowboys running back outside the top 40 drafted running backs. And I just think that's, again, going back to making good bets, betting on high-powered offenses. That's Rico Dowdle. And I don't know everything about how they're going to deploy their backfield, but I do know that he's definitely right now the most explosive running back they have in the building. So that's where I'd push my chips in on, and not on Zeke at this point.
I totally agree. I think Dowdle is one of the best value picks on the board this year. Fitz, where do you have Dowdle ranked?
That's a good question. I think it's in the 40s somewhere. Erickson, do you have Dowdle ranked ahead of Zeke or behind Zeke?
I have him ahead of Zeke.
Okay. So I have Zeke ranked higher, and I haven't gotten Dowdle as much because Zeke has been pretty cheap, and I've gotten Zeke in a fairly decent percentage of drafts so far. What I like about Zeke is that when we saw him sort of, I don't know if it was forced into a pass catching role, but he showed out as a pass catcher last year for New England, which was sort of strange, sort of a role reversal for him. I do think he's got more pass catching upside than Dowdle, but I do think Dowdle probably has more juice at this point and might be better equipped to be a lead guy. So I do like this. It is one of these ambiguous backfields, and I really don't know how it's going to play out there, but I think Dowdle is probably a smart investment that I should be making more of.
I would rather have Dowdle on my team this season than Zeke. I think he should be ranked higher.
I think the thing with Dowdle, too, is I feel like we could get some clarity in week 1, where if it's just Zeke's at the goal line, then you just cut Dowdle. You just move on. You don't need to harp. Week 1 will tell us a lot. I think that's really something to keep in mind when you're making these late round picks to the end of your rosters. What about week 1 is going to tell you what to do with this player? the last thing you want is to draft more roster cloggers. Those guys are wicked annoying to have on your teams. I don't think Dowdle's a roster clogger. I think you're going to know what to do with him after week 1. So that's another reason I really like him.
In fairness, though, I mean, I don't think we're going to see the sort of Zeke usage that we saw in Big D like 5 years ago. It's not going to be a 20 to 25 touch a game scenario.
I think for me, it's more about who's in the red zone, right? Because if Dowdle doesn't have that, then I don't care how explosive he is. Like, he's not going to be able to do enough because that's why we want the Dallas Cowboys running back, because touchdowns, because offense.
True.
So,
Fitz, let's go to your last league winning sleeper.
Blake Corum. So Kyron Williams coming off a terrific 2023, but he's undersized and he did miss some time due to an injury. I thought Blake Corum was the best pure runner in this year's rookie running back class, and the Rams spent a 3rd-round pick on him, which suggests, maybe tips their hand a little bit, that they are thinking maybe Kyron Williams is not built for the sort of workhorse role they gave him last year when he was averaging down the stretch like over 20 touches a game for the Rams. So Blake Corum could have some independent fantasy value, even if Kyron stays healthy, maybe some flex worthiness. But if Kyron were to get hurt, then Corum becomes this winning lottery ticket because, like if Kyron fell down a flight of stairs today, for my week 1 rankings, I would have Blake Corum in the top 15 at running back, maybe the top 10. Maybe not top 10. They're playing, I think, Detroit, and Detroit's got a pretty good run defense. But obviously, massive value for Corum. If anything were to happen to Kyron, probably some standalone value, even if Kyron stays healthy.
Yeah, let's say like if Kyron decided to retire, let's not wish falling down the stairs upon him. That's a little harsh. But no, I know, I got you. Yeah, I totally agree. Like, he makes so much sense to me as somebody who I do think there's a world where he has standalone value, and even if he doesn't, is like arguably the best handcuff you could have if he doesn't have standalone value. Like if Kyron is not in the picture, which is very reasonable given his size and he was banged up last year, like I think Corum is a great pick where he's going. Erickson, do you like Corum this year?
Love Blake Corum. I think that we're going to see him be even more productive potentially if he gets a starting role or any opportunities than he was last year at Michigan. Again, talking about the post-year ACL injury bump in production, where would Blake Corum been drafted if he didn't tear his ACL, right?
Yeah.
He could have been that more productive. People wouldn't have looked at him, comparing him to his pre-ACL form where, he looks like he took a step back. He doesn't look as explosive. Now he falls to round 3. Well, if anyone's been scooping up value at the draft at the offensive skill positions, it's been the Rams. So yeah, I thought Blake Corum was a great prospect coming out. I thought it was really smart for the Rams. And again, going back to what's going to happen in week 1, somebody at Greg Kellogg, shout out to, we got to meet him at the Fantasy Football Expo. He asked me about the split between Blake Corum and Kyron Williams. And I was like, I don't know, man. Get your popcorn ready for week 1. It should be fun. And just to be honest, I feel much better being on the Corum side than the Kyron side, because I think that it could be shocking to the people that are drafting Kyron Williams really aggressively. I get the upside case for what he showed last year, but Blake Corum, man, he was a stud. He was a stud at Michigan, super productive, and the Rams drafted him for a reason.
Kyron is one of the guys who could really burn me this year because I'm getting very little of him at cost. You know, when considering their ADP, I will take Blake Corum 100 times out of 100 over Kyron this year. Again, that could burn me. Kyron's a fun player to watch. Like, no, it's not a shot against him, but I just really like the value of Corum this year. One last league-winning sleeper here, Erickson. You know this is one that I love.
J.K. Dobbins, baby. Los Angeles Chargers starting running back. That's what I think is going to happen here in week 1. Do I think he's going to last the entire 17-game season? Probably not, but every report I've read from training camp, because J.K. Dobbins has not played in the preseason whatsoever because they don't want to risk injuring their starting running back. They've said he's looked really explosive, that he looks back to his old self. And I think that his ADP would be even higher if we did get a glimpse of him in the preseason, ripping off a big run, and we'd see him going well ahead of guys like Gus Edwards or Kamani Dowdle, the other players in his backfield. So for me, again, Greg Roman has always preferred J.K. Dobbins over Gus Edwards. When they were both healthy under Greg Roman in Baltimore, there was never a conversation about Gus Edwards is the RB1. It was J.K. Dobbins is the RB1 and Gus is there if J.K. Dobbins is not available for us. So again, I'm not swayed by the contract. It's just how contracts work. Gus Edwards played last year, was really productive. You get paid. That's how it works. J.K. Dobbins was injured. That's why he got $50,000 guaranteed or something very, very low. And that's why it was scary to invest in him in May, because he didn't know if this guy was going to make the team. But it's very clear that he's going to make the team. And I think it might be the RB1 on this offense. So Greg Roman, we've seen him be productive in this offense before. So I think that J.K. Dobbins, I don't know how long this candle's going to burn for, but I'm ready to watch, and I think it's going to be productive at least from the start.
I think J.K. Dobbins has the widest gap between his cost on draft day and his upside that doesn't require another player getting hurt to tap into that upside. Because there are some handcuffs who obviously there would be like huge jump up if another player got hurt. But I like the cost is nothing and the upside is immense. I think he's the perfect sleeper pick this year because if he's healthy, he is going to be a massive value. And if he's not healthy, it'll be very easy to drop him. And you're dropping your round 13 pick. I mean, that's going to happen for a lot of the guys taken that late anyway. So to me, he's not somebody that's going to be a roster clogger late on your bench. It's going to be very obvious if either he's healthy and has the juice. And again, in that case, he's a league winner. Or if he doesn't, okay, just drop him. Like I love him as a late round pick in drafts as long as he continues to go in that like round 12 to round 14 range. And that's even up from where it was early in draft season. I think it's a no-brainer because when you think about how you will actually play out the season, which is I know way you like to approach it, Erickson, is like, okay, yeah, I like this guy here better than so-and-so, but what's it going to look like after week one? Like to me, Dobbins is just such a no-brainer of it'll be so easy to know if either you have it or you don't with him. Fitz, what are you doing with Dobbins this year? I know earlier this offseason, I talked to you about, should I be keeping him in some of these other leagues, very deep keeper leagues? And you were like, no, I'm just not thinking about Dobbins ever again. Just kind of been burned too much by the injuries. Are you starting to come around a bit or are you still just avoiding him?
I'm coming around a bit. And I have said that I didn't want to bet on a running back who has torn multiple ligaments in his knee and has torn his Achilles. And that does seem like a poor bet medically. But man, the cost of the bet is so low right now. And when you factor in that he's going to be playing in a ridiculously run-heavy Greg Roman offense and has pretty minimal backfield competition, it's a pretty easy bet to make right now at these at such a low risk. Like if he doesn't work out, you cut him in the first 3 weeks of the season. Big deal. Move on. But right now, and plus we know that, medical, we have advanced by leaps and bounds medically, and we are now seeing like Cam Akers put spin moves on people after having torn his Achilles. And I don't know. I'm no longer thinking that it's an automatic death sentence for a running back who has an Achilles tear. And it would be great if Dobbins could get back to even like 80 or 90% of what he had been at his peak at Ohio State, because he was absolutely sensational for the Buckeyes when he played there. Maybe he can still salvage something in his NFL career.
Well, and that's the thing is like you really can't emphasize enough the cost. Like we're not out here saying draft him in round 7.
Right.
We're saying the injury stuff, which is so legitimate. Like I'm not saying you should stick your head in the sand and say he's definitely going to play 17 games this year because based on history, that probably won't happen. But that's baked into the cost. And that's what I just don't think you can emphasize enough is like it is not really a risk to take him in round 12 when, again, everybody you're taking at that point is kind of you're throwing darts anyway. So I love this pick where he is going right now in drafts. Let's do a couple of deep league lottery tickets here to wrap up. We'll go quicker through these because these are late round guys that are probably not going to actually be league winners, but just we think could be really good values. And, they're kind of other guys that are worth dart throws with the last couple of picks in your draft. So like I said, we'll go a little quicker on these. Fitz, who's your first deep league lottery ticket?
It's Danny Dimes. And hopefully I can win Erickson's approval with this one. Daniel Jones was QB9 in fantasy points per game 2 years ago. And now he gets to throw to the best wide receiver he'll have ever played with in number 6 overall draft pick, Malik Nabers. Jones ran for 708 yards and 7 touchdowns in 2022. Running ability is the cheat code for cornerbacks in fantasy football. And Daniel Jones, I know he's coming off the ACL, but he's still going to run. I think Jones could be a sneaky QB value this year.
Erickson, what do you think about Jones?
Well, Worm, you were in that draft with me, the 2 quarterback league. I got Mahomes, number 1 overall. And then who was my QB2? Daniel Jones, because he fell. And nobody wants to draft this guy. But like Fitz pointed out, he's already been a top 10 quarterback. He runs, but it's because he plays for the Giants and he threw a preseason pick 6 that nobody wants him anymore. But when you just look at the numbers, this guy can be productive in this offense. So yeah, again, it feels like a gross click every time. But when I look at my rankings, there's no reason you shouldn't be taking shots on Daniel, especially in Superflex, where he's so dirt cheap. Nobody wants to draft him. But again, if him and Malik Nabers can click, even if it takes 20 targets per game, he's going to be a value.
I think he's a no-brainer QB3 in any super flex format. I think he's a great pick in that range. By the way, did I see you in that league you're talking about? You got Jalen Waddle, shocker. Did I see you change your team name to America's Next Top Waddle?
Dude, this is the greatest fantasy football team name, courtesy of the FantasyPros team name generator, which is basically doing what I've been trying to do in my mind for the past 10 years, trying to take players on my team and create a fantasy football team name. Now the generator does it. God, I love artificial intelligence. It's so great.
Great stuff. All right, Erickson, who's your first lottery ticket here?
I'm going with the tight end here, Tucker Kraft for the Green Bay Packers. So he had basically missed the entire offseason program dealing with a pec injury, and that kind of put Luke Musgrave in the driver's seat to be the tight end one. But Tucker Kraft came back a couple weeks ago, and it's just been rave reviews from him out of Packers camp. They're excited about his yards after the catch ability, which he flashed last year in the second half of the year when the Packers offense really took off. Not when Luke Musgrave, again, can't say causation, cause correlation, whatever you say. But Tucker Kraft was on the field when the Packers offense was good. I'll just leave it at that. And when you look at what he did, again, productive, more productive than Luke Musgrave was during the first half of the season. So, and when we saw them last time they played in the playoffs, it was Tucker Kraft that was more productive, 6 targets, 3 catches, and a touchdown with multiple red zone opportunities. So I think that at worst, Kraft is going to be the preferred tight end in the red zone because of the blocking ability. So I think Kraft to me is my favorite late round sleeper tight end. And because I just think that the talent gap between him and Musgrave, I don't think is very significant. The draft capital is not significant. And it wouldn't be the first time we see a tight end that gets drafted after another tight end in the same class outproduce that particular player, a la Mark Andrews and Hayden Hurst, right? Mark Andrews got drafted second, but he ended up being the more productive player. I think we could see something similar with Kraft and Musgrave.
Fitz, this is one where you disagree with Erickson. You've got Musgrave ranked significantly higher than Kraft.
I do, but I agree with Erickson that the talent gap is probably not significant. I just think right now Luke Musgrave has pole position for that starting job. But I mean, if anything happened to Musgrave, Kraft would be an instant must-have waiver wire guy. And, we don't really know how Matt LaFleur feels about these two, but I think he probably feels the same way I do in that, I like both. And I think LaFleur probably does too. And Kraft did produce and look pretty good last year after Musgrave lacerated his kidney and missed a bunch of time.
All right, Fitz, let's stick with you for your last lottery ticket.
Oh, so I've, pandered to Erickson with the Daniel Jones pick. Now I have to pander to you, Worm, with a Rashod Bateman selection. And I don't necessarily agree with John Harbaugh that Rashod Bateman is one of the best wide receivers in the league. But I did really like him as a prospect when he came out of the University of Minnesota in 2021. Thought he basically had no holes in his game at the time. And he had just, I watch a lot of, I'm here in Big Ten country. I watch a lot of Go for Football, probably too much. And Bateman always looked really good to me. Dealt with a lot of injuries. And it seems like every time he gets any sort of traction to his NFL career, something goes wrong or he gets hurt. So anyway, the Ravens like Rashod Bateman. He's projected to be a starter, and this Ravens offense should be pretty good with Todd Monken calling the plays and with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. And we know opponents are going to have to honor the Ravens running game with Lamar and Derrick Henry, so that's probably going to make things a little bit easier for their wide receivers. Bateman's one of those guys you can get in the very, very late rounds and could return a handsome profit on a minimal investment.
I totally agree. Obviously, just again, as your last pick, I wouldn't even reach on him. If somebody else takes the chance, fine. Don't cry about it. But if he's there with your last pick, I just like him as a late lottery ticket for sure. Erickson, who is your last lottery ticket?
For me, this is my pick of this year's Puka Nacua, Malik Washington for the Miami Dolphins. I think that he's looked absolutely terrific in the preseason. They're finding creative ways to get him the ball. Again, this is the rookie from Virginia. Was super productive his final year, 47% dominator rating, which led the entire wide receiver class, 38% target share. He had over 1,400 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. He was graded super high by PFF, second highest graded receiver in the class. And that's a lot of the boxes that Nacua picked up. It is as a player at BYU. PFF loved him. He graded really high in their stuff. So for me, he just fits the scheme so perfectly because his bread and butter is yards after the catch. And we know that McDaniel, that's what he does with this offense, is setting up these guys for yards after the catch. We thought Odell Beckham Jr. was going to be the wide receiver 3 in this offense. He's still on the pup. I don't know if we're ever going to see him play or be healthy at any point. So Malik Washington has kind of staked his claim to be, I can be the wide receiver 3 in this offense as a rookie, that anytime he gets opportunities, I expect him to be productive, because that's the only uphill battle he's facing. But like when I talked about earlier in the show, you want players on good offenses. That's how you unlock them. If Malik Washington were to get a starting role in this offense, whether it's an injury to Waddle, one of the running backs, Tyreek Hill, I think he would smash, because I think that his skill set fits exactly what they want to do. And that's why it was a perfect draft pick when they made him, and he kept falling. I thought it was so weird in the draft to see him go into day 3 because of someone with so much talent like a Malik Washington. So, and the other thing too, he's their kick returner. So he's going to be active on game day. So we're going to get to see it. Oh, Waddle has to jog off to the sideline. Tyreek Hill is taking a break on the sideline. Malik Washington is going to be in the game. So we're going to see this guy, I think, in an ancillary role from the get-go. And then as the season progresses, somebody misses time, I think Malik Washington could have a major, major role. And again, you don't want to attribute Puka Nakua's success to the Cooper Kupp injury, but it helped a lot, right? It helped put him into a starting role. So that's something that I'm kind of keeping in mind, that with Malik Washington, again, another day 3 rookie, but someone I think that is super talented and fits the offensive system to a T.
Fitz knows I love Malik Washington. We did a bunch of rookie drafts on the Dynasty podcast with me, him, and Bogman in April and May, which everybody should go check out that feed. We're going to be continuing some Dynasty stuff into the season, so be sure to stick with us on that side. But I think I took Malik Washington in every rookie draft that we did, Fitz, when we were doing those mock drafts. I really love the talent. Even if I'm nervous about the fit in year 1, if the opportunity will end up being there or not, Erickson laid out the case for how it could be there. And if it is there, I think he's a no-brainer fit in this offense. I love Washington as a call here.
Yeah, good guy to keep on your waiver wire speed dial. I think he's probably going to go undrafted in most leagues, but maybe he is a one of those Puka Nacua candidates, because he is probably just one injury away from fantasy relevance. And yeah, he, after transferring from Northwestern to Virginia, he was just insanely productive for the Cavs last fall. So yeah, maybe a guy who just seems like a gamer, and if he does get a chance to get on the field and get involved in an offense that everyone's really excited about, with a fantastic play caller in Mike McDaniel, maybe good things could happen, and he could have that Puka or near Puka impact.
We'll get out of there on that. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around for this long episode. Also, go check out the fantasy team name generator that Erickson mentioned. That's a kind of a new fun tool we've got. And you've drafted all these teams now. Let's make sure we get creative and have some fun with the team names here as you get into the season. So good on him for shouting that out. For Erickson and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.